Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to Agency Talk. This is Digital Marketer's weekly talk show where we sit down with industry experts and agency professionals. Today, we are joined by none other than Atiba de Souza. Some know him as Video Content Superman, but today he's got so much for us. He is the CEO of Client Attraction Pros. They are an organic video-first content marketing agency. He brings over 25 years of content creation experience, video production, SEO, client attraction, and so much more. As always, if you're able to, please turn on your cameras so we can see your smiling faces. If you do have any questions, please use the Q&A tool down at the bottom so we can make sure to get those answered for you guys. As always, we are joined by Mark de Grasse, President of Digital Marketer and host for today's Agency Talk. So Mark, please take it away.
Thank you, Cameron, and very excited to see you again, Atiba. We were just talking about how I think it's been a while, but we're all so busy. It always just seems like yesterday to me, where I'm like, oh yeah, we just saw each other in like South Carolina or something. I think that one might have been a couple of years ago.
And we're actually going to talk about that one today.
Are we? Okay, that's great.
We're going that far back, y'all.
So what's going on with you? What's the haps?
Well, first off, it feels like I'm home. I feel like Dorothy, and I just came home. It feels so good to be home. So thank you for that. And because I'm home, I wanted to debut two hats today. So this is the first one. No one has ever seen this hat before. And because today's the first Friday in November, y'all ready for this? I got another hat for you. Hold on. And I'm going to be one of those people you're going to say it's too early for this, but yes.
Love it. It's not too early. It's November. You know,
it's a Superman Christmas hat. But again, thanks for having me, though. Seriously, though, guys, wanted to for us today to talk a little bit about this thing called podcasting.
Love it. It does.
And Mark, if I can, yes, 3 hats make one day. 3 hats one day. Something happened, and you're partially to blame, Mark.
Oh,
and so I'm here to publicly blame you, buddy. Love you.
It happens.
All jokes aside, a lot of people talk to me and they say, "Oh, Atiba, you're on stage all the time, and you're all over the place." And a lot of that started with the Digital Marketer podcast.
Really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Me and you on the podcast. That was 2.5 years ago now.
Wow.
Right. Then Christina Hooper and I started having conversations about, oh, there she is. I didn't even know she was coming. And I said her name just as she showed up. Christina Hooper and I started having conversations about podcasting 2.5 years ago. Then on one of these calls, Jay Vix was on, and Jay Vix and I started having conversations about podcasting. And then we had the first certified partner day in the pandemic in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I came down, and me, you, and Jay spent about 4 hours, and we touched on it a little bit in there as well. And so I want to kind of share with everybody what's happened. And I'm sharing this with all of us because we're all agency owners. We all want to build our companies. We all want to grow, and that's what's happened to me. So can we share that story, Mark?
No.
Oh, yes. Gotta go then.
Well, no, that's so awesome because, for me, podcasting was kind of funny because I was never actually into podcasts until I had a client back when I had my agency ask about a podcast. And I was like, oh, yeah, that should actually be pretty easy. And so, I don't like to do anything that I haven't done before. So I made my own personal podcast first, and then I started producing it for clients. And what I realized was that it was the easiest, most genuine content generation you can do. In terms of, if you look at, because we look at the 3 core pillars, right? You have articles, you have video, and then you have podcast. And those are the 3 forms that we typically do. But podcasting is by far the easiest, not just the easiest to generate a ton of content, but also the easiest to be genuine on because you're just having a conversation. So,
yes.
But all that said, that's amazing that had such an impact on your business and your life in general, because actually it did on mine too. So I get it.
And I think if you listen to Jay and where Jay has been recently, he will tell you the same thing. It's his podcast that has caused and fueled his explosion. Christina even, and I'm going to put words in her mouth since she's here, and she can correct me if I'm wrong.
She's muted, don't worry.
Yeah, she's muted, so we can put words in her mouth. But her podcast and being on podcasts specifically, and that's what we're going to talk about, is guesting on podcasts has been the thing that has connected, and it's creating the thing that I'm calling podcasting to partnerships.
Love it.
Because as agency owners, it's hard to go out and get a new client. It is. However, when someone refers you to someone else, when you have a partnership relationship, let's say you're an organic agency and you partner with a paid ads agency. Well, they don't do what you do, and you go back and forth and you share. But it's always thank you, Ming, how in the world do we create partnerships? Christine and I were talking about that years ago. Like, how do we get to effective partnerships? Christina has gotten there. She's made it work in her way. Jay has made it work in his way, and I've made it work in mine. And I'm sharing this because the three of us started a journey, and we all took slightly different paths to success. So I'm also not saying this is the only way to do it.
Just one way that where did it.
No.
No, I completely agree with you, because I think a lot of the relationships that I have now, friends like you and dozens of other people, were actually started on the podcast by having that interview. And I think that the entire platform, like the concept of podcasts, is it's natural to be genuine. And really, in terms of making a connection with the audience, it makes it much easier too, because you can't fake. Well, you can be so fake that you do an hour-long podcast and display something you intend to display. But typically, people just break down and talk like normal people when you're in a conversation. And you can listen to anybody's podcast and probably know more about them personally just from a single episode of listening to them talk versus, spiffy commercial or a nice article or even a book. Like, I think the podcast speaks to it. So I completely agree with you with that said. But how do you turn it into partnerships? Because it's very easy to generate tons of podcasts and get literally nothing out of it.
And that's been the issue, right? And that's the big fight too, right? And so here's what's happened for us. This year, this calendar year, it's November 2nd. I'm going to tell you what has happened from January 1 to November 2nd. This year, we did the math. I think it's just less than 25 podcasts I've done this year. Those 25 podcasts have directly led to 9 stages where people have invited me to speak on stage, 4 where people have indirectly invited me to speak on stage. In other words, they saw the podcast and then came through and contacted. All right. It's like, oh, because you were on, we want you. So that's 13 stages that I've been on because of being a guest on someone else's podcast. Then that's not a partnership, right? There's no money in that yet. That's led to 1 co-branded partnership, several just referral-based partnerships that so far through to November 2nd, 2023, from the 1st to the 2nd, January 1st to the November 2nd, we've generated $276,000 this year.
That's incredible.
Okay. 276,000. But get this, last year I did over 30 shows. I got 0 stages and I made no money.
What'd you do? What changed?
And that's what got me to coin this podcast to partnership. It was an accident. It was an absolute accident. So it was early January. When I say early, I'm talking like January 3rd. And I'm going to do a guesting on a show. And I show up to the show, y'all. And the host is so excited to see me and just is so pumped up. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I don't have a clue who you are and why you're so excited. Here was the issue, though. 2.5 weeks later, earlier, he was actually a guest on my show.
Oh.
And I totally forgotten him. I've
I've done
forgotten everything. Sorry?
I've done that before.
But it led me to, and we all have, let's be honest, but it led me to a place of being completely embarrassed. Because he felt like we just saw each other and we had this great connection. And I'm wondering, how do you say your name?
You didn't say that, did you?
I didn't. Okay. But here's what it taught me. It taught me that I was being a guest on his show for the wrong reason. I was going on people's shows. I was showing up on people's shows so that I could hear myself talk, so that I could practice my spiel, my pitch. Some of us show up on shows because it's supposed to be good for SEO. It's not a good reason. Some of us show up on shows because we want to get clients out of it. Not a good reason. And that's what I learned early this year. And it smacked me like a ton of bricks. I was so embarrassed on that show. And I said, okay, so why are we doing this then? And it was in answering that question that everything changed for me. This is me. This is why everything changed for me. And I realized that the thing that I needed to do was do what I tell my clients to do, to be honest, which is become obsessed with my audience. And in this case, my audience was the host of the show. And when you become obsessed with your audience, you become obsessed with what they care about. And what the host cares about, Mark, what you care about is all these other people here, all the people who are watching on the live stream. If we don't give them something that actually helps them, you will say Atiba was a waste of time of a guest. And that's what I had to become obsessed about. And so we changed the tactic. We were still getting on shows, but now it was, okay, we're going to go on and I'm going to study this host and what they care about before I get there. So now I can over deliver for what they care about and what they believe their audience wants to hear. That, my friends, changed everything.
That's huge. Well, I think it's, it should be part of every aspect of business if you think about it, especially marketing, but it's so easy just to go in and say like, wow, I got to watch out for me. And if I don't talk about this about me, then nobody else will. And you kind of get in your head, not just your head, but I see companies do this all the time where they think about themselves first and their features, their benefits, their products, and it has nothing to do with what we actually need to do, which is serve the customer. And all of this sounds obvious. We've all heard it a billion times before, but it's in practice, it does take that realization that you had, where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going on to sell all the time, to sell me, instead of what about you? What can I help you with? And start, turn the thing around. Easier said than done. So very significant accomplishment to do that, and then to turn it into stages, getting on stage, generating money. That's next level.
Well, thank you. And I'm not going to say that I did it for that purpose, because I didn't expect that would be the outcome. Okay. To be honest, that became the outcome, and then we got to a place where it was like, oh crap, this is working. You might want to figure out why this is working.
Well, that's how marketing should work, though. If you think about it, like, I've never come up with a plan where I was like, this is perfect and will never change, and then it never changes. Like, no, it always adapts. And so, I think trying different things, but also having the realization that you could try something for years and do it completely wrong and get very little benefit out of it, but just do it because it's habit and you're disciplined and you're supposed to do it. So that's why you do it. So I think that kind of introspection you did is fantastic. Now for that transition though, after you had that oops moment, where did you go? Did you say, hey, I'm gonna do the research? I heard that. So you research the host, figure out the audience, figure out what they're interested in, and then talk on that subject. And then is this just basically a prep script that you put yourself through before every podcast you go on?
Great question. So let me say this. There are a couple things I don't do. Okay. I don't prep scripts. I don't prep topics. I don't also do follow-up emails. I know. It's like,
Wow.
what? Yeah. A lot of those, I don't do any of that. But here's what we do. And I'll say thank you, Christina Hooper, on this one too, because I'd been on Remarkable. I wanted to get a Remarkable for a long time. And again, at a DMCP day, y'all,
You won one.
Christina shows up with her Remarkable, and I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And so I got one. And so on my Remarkable, what we do is we have a template, and it's called a dossier. And we go out and research the host. We get to know what's important to the host. We go listen to past episodes. Consider the type of questions that they're asking and what it was that they were trying to get the audience to hear. Okay? So now we have that. We know where they're trying to go, how they want to deliver. And so now when they come and we talk, we just talk. Right? The closest that I come to doing that would have been like what I did today, which for any of y'all who were late, y'all missed it. I debuted 2 new hats today. That's 4, Atiba. 2 new hats today. Right? That's as close as I come to scripting.
Wow. I love that. And, I kind of do that too. I do have Cameron, luckily, does the research on the guest. And then we have the topic that we talk about, and we kind of a structure that we try to present. But a lot of times the conversation, like I don't write a list of questions. I usually start it with like, what's hot in your business right now? Because that's what I want to talk about, because that's the thing that you're talking about a lot. So you're probably interested in it. And I always, and not that these guests are bad, but you have the guests that are like, I need to talk about this. And then they come on the podcast and they preach. And it's like 15 minutes, you'll be like, I haven't said anything. Like this isn't how podcasts are supposed to work. But, and I really just think it depends on the individual too, because some individuals need that because maybe they're super introverted. They don't like aren't used to the platform. So they're nervous about it. So they over prep, and then it ends up being kind of robotic or salesy, which is even worse than robotic. But I totally appreciate what how you do it, because I think it leads to more natural conversations. It's supposed to flow, right?
Yes. Now, that being said, you may not be me, and you may need to have a little bit more prep, which is perfectly fine. It's just what I do. But I will tell you, there is one thing in secret sauce, and it doesn't happen during the show. It happens after the show, but really before and after the show. So we have some criteria on how we choose the show. And one of the things in our criteria is, how does the host promote the show? So we study how they promote the show. So if all they do is put out new episode image, we're probably not going to apply to be on that show. If they're putting out content about the show, snippets of it, we probably are going to apply to be on that show. Here's why. Because when we're done our interview time, I'm going to say to them, hey, listen, I know you put stuff out to advertise and market the show. I want to help. I want to be part of that. So send it to us and we will help promote the show for you. What most hosts hear is, oh, you want fun stuff of you talking. It's not what I want. What I actually want is to make them look good. And so when they send me whatever they send, we go through and choose the best things that make them look the best.
Love that.
And that's what we publish. That is the secret sauce that makes people then say, because I don't do email follow-up, I'm bad at it, y'all. Us marketers, we're always bad at something. That's mine. Okay. But I'm the video content Superman, so we can produce video for you. We can put video out. We're going to do that. And so we're going to put that out and we're going to promote you on all of our channels. And we get hosts back saying, oh man, thank you so much. Nobody else does this. Yeah.
I know. No, well that's huge, and that just so you guys know, that's a huge tip because I go on a lot of podcasts and I have a lot of podcast guests, and one very few will promote even their episode a lot, like probably like out of I want to say 1 out of 10, but it might be closer to like 1 out of 20 actually, shares their podcast information. I'm just like, man, why? How the heck does that happen? Like, I
Right.
love when people
Right.
post and tag, but when they do, a lot of times it's just about them. It's just their clip of them talking, and I'm like, okay, I don't even know if I, will promote this because I'm not even in it. It's just a person talking, and he didn't talk about the show, or she didn't talk about the show. So you're right, it just doesn't have the same impact as what you're saying, which is promote the show.
Yes. Yes.
So what do you do specifically? You do a social media post or an email campaign, or how do you actually promote the
Well,
show?
no, I don't do email because
Don't do
I just suck at email. Okay.
You can do a newsletter.
I don't even do that.
Even I have a newsletter.
Mark, I don't even do that. Okay. Yeah, I suck at that. Okay. Real talk. I do. I'm gonna tell you, I suck at emails so bad that number one, I write really great emails for everyone except me. And I have never figured out how to hire someone to write emails for me. I've tried, and it always failed. Anyway, so I don't do email. No, it's all on social media. We're going to tag them. We're going to post. We're going to repost. If they send us stuff that we didn't like, right, that doesn't highlight them enough, we're going to cut up what they sent and create new stuff. The whole point is to make them look good.
It's really not hard.
It's
It's not a big lift. We're always, that's the biggest question I'm sure a lot of marketers get, which is, what do we post? And it's like, I'll just post something that you were in that could be beneficial to both parties, and here you go. Here's the show. So I love that approach. I think it's it's paying it forward is what it's doing.
Yeah.
Which is, again, what we always tell people to do, but
Yes.
then we personally don't get around to it all the time. So love that. Now, with that said, for a lot of people who haven't been on a bunch of podcasts, maybe never get invited to be on podcasts, what could they do to kind of put themselves out there to be like, I'm good at podcasts, or what's the strategy?
So it's a great question. And one that, again, I should have been better prepared to answer that question, Mark, but I figured we were going to come in.
No pre-questions.
It was our friends, and we were just going to talk. So for those of you on the call, and several of you on this call know me, I'm the SOP king. And so I do have SOPs for this.
Nice.
Of how we get on shows. What's the process? Okay. How do I know that you can duplicate it? Because others have. And I'll be honest with you, I've never personally done it. My staff does it. So it's not like you need to be Atiba to do it, because Atiba's never done it. Okay. So let me take that excuse away from you of feeling like I need to be this guy. No, you really don't. You just need to be you. People want to talk to you because you have expertise. You've got expertise. So do this for me. I'm going to, in the chat, I'm going to drop meetatiba.com. That takes you to my LinkedIn. Just send me a message on LinkedIn. I'll send you the SOP. Okay.
I do that.
Make life easy, because I should have had a beautiful QR code and a link, but I don't.
That's fine. But well, just anecdotally then. I mean, is it
okay? So anecdotally, so we use Podmatch.
Oh, Podmatch. Okay.
So we use Podmatch. We use two different strategies, but Podmatch is a big part of it. And so if you're starting off, go to Podmatch. You can go to Podmatch. You can search inside of Podmatch for whatever category you want, and you will find shows who actually want guests to talk about certain topics that you're an expert in. From there, it's an application process. Now, the application process is one where Podmatch is going to make you fill out a whole bunch of stuff about who you are and so on and so forth to share with the host. But then we also do have a media kit that we send to everyone that talks about who I am, where I've been, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, makes me look good. And I'm going to thank Sin because she wrote a large chunk of it. So thanks, Sin. Again, y'all, we got everything we need in this family. So when I started and I said, it feels good to be home, I wasn't joking. Like, we've got everything we need in this family here. Experts.
Oh, well,
So start a pod match. You can apply. The thing that you have to figure out on pod match is what your cadence is. So do you want to do one show a week, one show a month? Well, that then starts to tell you how many shows you need to apply to. I don't have a silver bullet for you because it all depends on the niche and the shows you're applying to. Okay. In the beginning, I will tell you, don't worry too much about criteria. Just start. Other than making sure that they talk about, a topic that you can talk about. At this point, we will only do shows that have a minimum of 50 episodes, that promote themselves, that have certain reviews, and a couple other criteria that we've created over time. One of the things that I learned from our friend Lauren Petrullo that we've also done is you have testimonials from people, right? If you're in this community, you know other people in this community who will say great things about you. I've got a great testimonial from Qasim. I've got a great testimonial from a bunch of other people. We find shows where people who have given me a testimonial where they've been on, and then we send them the testimonial and say, hey, we'd love to come on and talk about this. Here's what Qasim said about me. Because Qasim's already been on their show. They already love Qasim.
Oh, it's easy.
All right. So I learned that from Lauren.
No, well, I think it kind of reminds me, Craig Andrews, he had his did an M3 presentation, and he talked about how his wife got him, I think got him onto 50 podcasts within, I want to say 30 days. And their whole strategy was really to find the podcast, the target podcast they wanted to be on. And then she would actually listen to a few episodes. And then when she reached out to them, she would start with, oh, I just listened to episode X and it just blew my mind and I love it. And it reminded me of this subject that I actually talk about and would love to come on the show and talk to you about that. And so it's just a little bit of footwork, but just doing that little step that probably takes like 10, 15 minutes. Totally. Like when somebody mentions a specific episode, I'm like, oh my gosh, this person actually listened to the podcast. Like that's a huge plus, because a lot of times, I hate to say it, but we're marketers. We have scripts. We know what to do, to say, and blah blah blah. And actually, the worst ones I get, are the ones when I don't know them. They have never actually listened to the podcast, and then are really just looking to promote their whatever. Now I'm better at filtering them out now because it's pretty obvious when you just read the messages. But a lot of times, like Christina was saying, she gets 20 to 30 applications a day for the podcast. And honestly, you don't want everybody on your podcast. You want people who are targeted, who are related, and who you personally connect with. Like, that's a huge requirement of podcasts, is that you have a connection with the person you're talking to. And it doesn't have to be a huge connection. It just has to be a connection you can talk about, just enough where you're like, okay, same industry. Oh, I checked out this person's stuff and that's kind of similar to what I like, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times it works. And then, I think the host job is really to adapt to the conversation as much as possible to make the guest feel heard, feel listened to, feel connected. And then that's it. But the hosting thing, I will say, is a little bit trickier than the guesting thing. Because you could have a bad guest and turn it into a good conversation with a few tricks. But yeah, I'd say just ask. But when you do ask to be on somebody's podcast, make sure you check out the podcast first, so you know what the heck's going on. So those are huge tips. Now for that, let's talk about presentation really quick, because we always, I talk about brand voice all the time, where I'm like, hey, you got to be consistent, you got to have principles, you got to maintain those principles. Do you have any tips for when you do go on the show? How do you represent yourself and whatever brand you're pitching, to make it consistent with what the brand is about?
So yes. So number one, show the heck up.
Yeah.
Okay. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to be blunt in saying this. I hope y'all don't mind. But I have people on my show and they show up and it's like they didn't realize it was going to be on video. Like, seriously? Or they're lighting so many different issues. And you're just like, what?
What are you doing?
Okay. So show up. So that once you get the show, showing up is a big part of it and showing up correctly. So you'll notice, like, if you go watch podcasts of me, I'm just about always in a jacket. Yes, I always wear a black shirt, but I'll put on a jacket. I'm going to show up. Yeah, I'm going to wear my baseball hat, but I'm going to show up. The lights will be on. I'm in my studio. My lighting, my audio is good. I'm going to show up. That's the first thing before you even open your mouth, because there's so many hosts who it starts and they're like, oh, wow, you look great. And all of a sudden they sit up.
I have seen that.
Right? You gotta show up. You gotta show up. That's the first thing. That's the first thing. The next thing to deal with specifically where you said there, and this goes back to something you said earlier, Mark. It's hard to talk for an hour and not be yourself.
Mm.
And if you're in a place where you don't even know your own values, don't do this yet. Know you. Know you. And be honest. I get hosts that ask questions that I can't answer.
Ugh, I hate that.
Well, at the same time, I'm going to say, I don't know.
No, it's a good answer.
Like, that's a really great question. And you know what? We've never considered that. Like, I had one host ask me a metric question that blew my mind about, had you ever considered YouTube in this way and then bringing in this data and that data to figure this out? And I don't remember the exact scenario. And I'm just like, holy crap, that's actually really smart. And I've never considered that. Be real.
Love it. Yeah, I think that goes back to you can't fake an hour. And so, if you are BSing, and you can BS a couple questions where it's like, well, what do you think about this? And then you're like, well, blah, 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 blah. And you just make it up off the cuff. But yeah, a lot of times if you don't know the answer and you have no input to give on that, you can just say, I don't know. Like, that's a great question. I'm going to research that after this episode because that's super smart and I should know that and blah, blah, blah. And then it makes the host feel good too, because they're like, oh, I'll take that versus a BS answer that doesn't mean anything. There's a reason we all hate politicians. Like, it's not unnatural. It's the most natural thing in the world because you're like, this person's full of crap. And as soon as you realize that, you've lost your branding. So yeah, no, I
well said, Mark.
I always relate it back. Well, because there's situations that, we just kind of accepted, like, oh, that's crappy because of X, and that's okay because we know it's bad. And so then we just accept these things, but it doesn't have to be. And your point about not BSing is perfect. Yeah. And I will say, just as a host, sometimes if an episode's boring, I will intentionally ask a question that may be inflammatory just because it's a show. It's supposed to be entertaining. And if you can't get those hooks in or something interesting rolling, then you're wasting your time because nobody's going to listen to it anyways. Not to say that you want to be fake or anything like that, but I kind of subscribe to the Hot Ones challenge methodology sometimes, of like pulling a question out of nowhere and being like, what do you think about this? And you always know you did it right because the person will be like, and then they'll stop. They'll literally, like, you hit the pause button because they never really thought about that before or didn't really think about it for a long time, and then they'll come back. So just so you know, if you're guesting, sometimes you will get questions that are intentionally to throw you off, or not to throw you off, but to liven up the conversation. Now let's talk about that though, because I've had some conversations that were super boring, and I'm like, oh my god, how long is there's a clock? Okay, I gotta keep going. How do you keep it interesting, especially if it's topics like you said, metrics? A lot of people don't connect to metrics, and it could get a little dry or maybe too technical for the audience that you're targeting. how do you keep things interesting? Because I've noticed just from your speaking style, just during this call, you have a good cadence, how you speak, you have good pause that I almost screw up half the time because I start talking. But you do have a very good presentation style that's interesting. How can somebody develop that?
Well, first, thanks for the compliment. I appreciate that. Then, so there were a bunch of questions in there. So let me try to break some of that down. This is something that I do, and I don't know if it will work for other people. Okay. I am very, very intentional to understand that there are two people when I'm on a podcast I'm talking to. At times I'm talking to the host, and at times I'm talking to the audience. And when I talk to the audience, this now we're talking about how to make things more lively and how to connect, right? When I'm talking to the audience, I talk to the audience. Hey, so I know you've been listening to us for a while, and man, we just deep dove into metrics, and that could have seemed like, oh my gosh, what in the world are they talking about? Let me break it down for you. And so I'll talk directly to the audience. Again, getting back to the original premise of caring more about what this host actually cares about, which should be their audience, if we chose this show correctly, right? And so that's the key there, is understanding when the conversation, and for me, it's a feel thing, when the conversation has gone too far here and left the audience out and coming back to the audience. Sometimes the host is boring.
That happens.
Sometimes you're just like, I had one doctor that I did a show with, and this guy literally came on and he said, I've got 25 minutes for the show. I'm in between patients right now, and here we go. And I mean, but he was dry and boring, and it was dull.
Yeah.
Okay. In those moments, and in all moments, as marketers, we have to remember the central truth to communication. Pain point, journey to satisfaction, before, after. You want to make this fun? They asked a question that's super boring. Turn it to the audience. This is where I know you are right now. This is your before state. Let me walk you to the after state. Let's have fun together.
Love it. Well, I especially love talking to the audience, because a lot of times and this goes back to like why it's a genuine thing, is because it's a conversation between individuals, right? Like we're just chatting, but we have a whole audience watching us. But it is easy not to address the audience and say like, hey, I'm here for you. And, that's a great question. We should ask the audience. Like there are ways to switch it. Not that you can do that on podcast, but, just in the group setting. But no, those are fantastic tips. The only thing I'll add is that, when you go on a podcast, don't be afraid to repeat yourself. Because a lot of times if you make a really good point, somebody will be like, oh man, that was a great point. Let me rewind. And then he said this one thing and I just can't remember what that was. And so if you do have a good point, or you have, the conversation is revolving around something that you do, don't be afraid to restate like, oh yeah, just like I said earlier, it's a really good idea to blah, blah, blah. And you could literally just keep on repeating this, because a lot of people are, doing work while they're listening. So it's not a bad thing to, say it again and again. So I'd say if you are, if you do get a bad question or a boring question, or it's whatever, you could actually just restate where you're saying like, oh yeah, just like I said earlier, there's 3 steps to the system, and the steps are important because of the XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And then even if it's not more interesting, it's at least reinforcing why you came on there in the first place, and then you win. So no, that's huge. And not forgetting the audiences.
Mark, that was a great point. Can you say that again, please?
I will, several times. I'm gonna beat it into everybody's head so they don't forget. That's fantastic. Now let's talk about let's flip it. Let's talk about the hosting side.
Oh yeah.
So What's your recommendation if somebody's new to podcasting, wants to get into it, has not done so many episodes, maybe not even guested that much? Do you have some kind of like default tips for keeping the conversation rolling, making it interesting, and hopefully not relying on a list of questions? Because I've been on podcasts where it's like this question and this question. I'm like, oh God, this is so boring. Like, you're not even listening to what I'm saying.
So Gabe just put in the chat, deja vu right now, because he's asked me this. And first off, even before we get to having someone on your show, let me just say this: start. Just do it. Okay? Just do it. So here's now where our system has evolved to. We're at a place now where my team goes out and finds shows that I want to be on, goes through that process. I'm on their show. Once I'm on their show, we also connect with them on social, usually LinkedIn. And the day after I'm on their show, somebody on my team will go on LinkedIn and say, hey, Atiba, really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. And you may not know, but he has his own show where he talks about X, Y, and Z and would love for you to be a guest. Would you be willing? How many people say no? Not many. So that's number one, how I get guests now. Okay. And so we create this reciprocal relationship where it's Christina Hooper. You can put in the chat what that's called, because I know you know it, because that's what we started 3 years ago talking about podcasting, and the book Content-Based Marketing. And that's the whole theory inside of content-based marketing. Well, part of the theory inside of content-based marketing. Now, we create dossiers for my guest. So not just when I'm going to be a guest, but also when I'm having a guest on. We're going to create a dossier. We're going to know that they're married. We're going to know that their company's been around for this long. We're going to know the type of clients that they have. We're going to know these types of things beforehand. I'm going to review those things, okay? And at least have them in the back of my mind. And sometimes, I might make quick notes too and just say, okay, if it goes south, we can talk about this or we can talk about that. Ooh. Okay. Nice. Right? Because we want to tie it back into something that they love and then bring the conversation back. Now, I was gifted to be a conversationalist. Okay. I don't need a script. I don't need prepared questions. Much like you, Mark, I start with one question, and based on their answer to that question, I form the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. You may not be that. And if you're not that, then I would then suggest that you look at what are the pillars of content that I want to cover in an interview. Develop a question in each one of those pillars. So you have a place where you're going to start. You're talking. And if this gets dry, we've been having a really, really great conversation right now, Mark. But for a moment, let's switch things up a little bit and let's go left for a minute. I want to ask you about this. That's how you do a transition into a new pillar.
Okay. That's a huge tip. Well, and I will say that, I seem okay at conversations now, but this has only been developed over the last year and a half. Like prior to that, I rarely had good conversations with anybody. It was a very rare thing. I'm actually super introverted. And I think through the podcasting and the speaking and the videos and the bazillion pieces of content that I created, I was able to do this. But really, it took a lot of introspection, and then it took a lot of opening, for me, because I used to never share my real opinion about anything. I would just, oh, I completely disagree with that, but I don't want to cause a stir. And so I would never say anything. And now I've kind of flipped it entirely, where a lot of times I'll say really, not offensive things, but I'll say some things where it's, interesting. And it's kind of well, whatever. It's actually what I think. And so it's almost like you have to be really honest with yourself. You have to know yourself. Respect your own opinions in order to, have the confidence to share them. And then the other side for me was the listening component, where it's a lot of people, especially nervous people or introvert people, are thinking in their heads all the time, well, that says that, then I think this, and then you're constantly just having a conversation in your head, essentially, and you're not saying anything. And then what that does is it doesn't allow you to listen to anything that anybody says. And so when I got better at podcasting, it was actually just listening was it. Like, oh, you said this really interesting point, and here's how it relates to something I'm going to say, and now we're having a conversation. So just in case you're, not not having good conversations, you could completely develop this skill. It's not something, some people are just born with it. Atiba, I'm sure you've always, made good connections like that, but it is something you can develop. And a lot of it is just being interested in people, what they're saying, and then knowing yourself and being confident enough to say what you think, which is, don't go too crazy with that until you understand how people think about what you think, or just be careful. Like that's a trick, but that's great advice.
So, but now let's take that a little bit further in something that's very, very hard for humans. Humans abhor silence in conversation. It feels like someone has to always be saying something. It's not true. It's just not true. And you've got to get comfortable with that. And so sometimes, someone's going to say something, and I'm going to say, And I need that moment to think, because I was actively listening to them. And I need that moment to think about where we go next. And it's okay. Heck, edit out the silence in post if you really, really need to. But you've got to be okay with that. You got to.
That's huge. And it is. It's very uncomfortable for people because, I think just, how we are now is just, it's constant. The noise is constant. It's there. The phone is constant. The noise outside is constant. The lights, everything, the inputs are a lot. And I think we've come to, kind of expect everything to be that way, where there is no silence. But for me personally, the meditation really helped. Actually, I can show you guys a trick. If you can't stop your mind thinking, you want to hack for that? Okay. Everybody close your eyes. Close your eyes. Okay. Now I just want you to just take a big breath in, breathe out. And then I want you to think of this one question in your head. What is my next thought going to be? Now, if you did it right, you're thinking about nothing, because your brain is trying to process what the next question is going to be. So it's like, if you've never experienced like meditation, like this is actually a hack to get into what you're supposed to do, which is be completely still. And complete stillness is not, I'm not moving. Yeah, that's part of it. But complete stillness is not thinking about anything. And so if you ever are in that spot where your head's rolling, and you can't even listen because you just have so much noise going on, if you do that one trick just for a minute, and that's the silence. If anybody was uncomfortable during that time, it means you're thinking too much all the time. And so try that out a few times a day, and it's like a reset button. And it helps a ton with listening. So love that. This is fantastic tips here. Now we only got a few minutes left, and this is supposed to be other people talking too. I think I manipulate or monopolize the entire session. But does anybody else have a question for Atiba? You can come off mute, or we'll unmute you. I don't know if we have that safety feature on. Cameron, did you not turn on the safety feature? But any questions? 30 minutes, Axel. That's impressive.
That's really impressive.
Is that anything?
Actually, I'm in an age where too much noise is killing my brain. So
I think we're all in that age.
Usually if it's really getting too noisy in my head and outside, I turn everything down, close my eyes, ring a bell, and shut down for 30 minutes.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
It helps.
Yeah. And there is the book Limitless actually talks about that, if you haven't read it yet.
No.
And how this noise is killing us.
Well, if you think about it, it's like, definitely no point in history of humans have been inundated with this amount of input all the time and just constantly going nonstop every day. Where, like I said, I think it's just a habit that we're in where it's just a constant expectation. Like, if I have a free second, I better check my phone and I better
gotta fill it.
Yeah, I'm wasting time. I think that's always been been my weakness, is like, I'm wasting time. I got to fill this up to the max. Otherwise, what am I doing here? But the nothing, that's a thing. And you need a percentage of it every single day. Otherwise, you'll go nuts or burn out, or it won't be good. That's the effect. So, man, this has been fantastic. Does anybody have any questions about podcasting? Maybe something I haven't asked about starting the podcast or getting on the podcast, or even like the duration, the theme. A lot of times for podcasting, even, and this is something that I'm kind of reestablishing with using AI tools, which is the concept of content series, which I talk about in the content certification. But a lot of times, when you're testing your first 100 episodes, and just so everybody knows, you're not a serious podcaster until you've done 100 episodes. So aim for 100. That's the number. But during that 100, you could be doing testing just like you do on every other marketing type, where you say, okay, this is the episode. We're talking about marketing. So I'm going to do a series about each method. So we're going to have 3 guests for SEO, 3 guests for email, 3 guests for social. And then I'm going to, and people know what they're getting. And the reason to do this, I think, is to, give the listeners an expectation about what's going on. Like, oh yeah, I love the email series, it's awesome, so I listen to all the email series. It's how you get subscribers. Do you have any tips? Oh, actually, do we have a question from Christina? Have you ever asked the host not to publish your episode or stop the interview partway through because you realized it was a bad fit?
That's a really great question.
That's a great question. I've never done that, by the way. I've never stopped.
So number one, it comes down, we start with the screening process of which shows we apply to. Right. And listening to some episodes before the show to realize we don't like this person for Atiba. That's what the team is figuring out. Right. And so we don't apply there. Then I've never actually stopped or asked someone not to publish. However, I'm not a fan of the pre-interview just because it's, for me, it wastes my time. You want to talk about everything we're going to talk about? Well, then just talk about it. But there was one time, one person in particular, he and I did a pre-interview, and this was the only time I was ever happy we did a pre-interview, because he said, listen, I'm going to get antagonistic on the show, and I want to create an argument with you. I'm just like, yeah, I'm not in it for that.
Oh, really? I love that. That's my favorite.
I don't mind us going back and forth, but you saying I deliberately want to argue with you and, try to prove you wrong just for the sake of it. Like, you're going in with that intention. That just didn't feel good.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, I think if there's fake positions, if it's a real position, like I've worked for executives where that was their entire management style, was yelling. And so I just adapted to it and started yelling back. But no, it's not for everybody. But arguing is fun. I think, if you look at it as just a different form of content, like maybe that's the show. The show is an argument. And so, but you have to be comfortable with that. And that's fine.
Not.
Yeah,
so
and you're not. So there you go. Nothing wrong with that.
All right, Gabe. Great question.
We got a question from Gabe. We got 5 minutes. So go for it, Gabe.
It's a quick question, but thank you for everyone here. Tiba's the one who actually pushed me to start a podcast. He said, set the date, do it, show up. And that's exactly what he was telling us today. But my one question is, you're a host, you're a guest, and you have an agency. How do you balance that whole thing? Like, how do you know when to go start your podcast, to record it, then be a guest, then work on your agency?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Gabe. So I'll say this. So when we started doing podcast guesting specifically, my team went ballistic, and I got to the place where I had 4 a week, and that was insane. I couldn't keep up with it, right? And at that same time, we were trying to find guests for my show as well. So it was guesting on 4 plus my own. Now, with my own, I only do it on Mondays in a certain block of time, period. Okay, so that's one thing. I blocked that off. But you can't guest that way because people have different schedules. So we had to pull back, and now there's a maximum of 1 a week. We cannot schedule more than 1 guest a week. I don't have the time for it.
Makes sense.
You know,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it, because I was the same way. I think when Cameron started, maybe I was doing like 6 to 8 a week, and I was like, I'm exhausted, and we can't publish more than like 2. I think we published 4 to 6 a month, and so we had like months of content, and it was like, what's the point of even doing this? So I just and how you get to that point is you leave your schedule open, and so I think I had 2 days a week that had 4-hour blocks where you could schedule a podcast. The podcasts are short; they're not an hour. I think we schedule like 45 minutes, and I aim for 20 to 30 minutes of podcast per episode. So once you set up these parameters, but initially I would say if you could put up 1 a week, like you're doing good, like you're doing way better than most people. And if you systematically start creating the production process, there's no reason why you can't make that even individually, just with maybe like an hour for the podcast, 2 to 3 hours maybe for editing. But even with AI, I mean, that number's gone down significantly. So we could actually put a podcast together. If I had to personally put a podcast together in an hour, like I could do that. But you got to get the system down, and it's practice, and it'll get shorter as you keep going. So figure out what you need to do. And then I'm more of an opportunistic podcaster, where I'm like, yeah, if I'm available, great, let's just do it. Worst case scenario, I'll publish it later, but at least we got the content, because that's the hard part. But figure out what works for you. So we got 2 minutes left, Atiba. Where can people learn from you?
Well, we got one more question, and I got
one more question.
Okay, so benefit of live versus pre-recorded. It depends on you. It really does. If you're good with live as a host, do live. Now, understand that I might freak some of your guests out, because not all guests can handle going live, right? As the guest, I could care less, right? But that's me. So it really depends on you and what it is that you're trying to do, and what your goals are if you're the host. One thing I wanted to share with you guys, because we talked all about this, and I gave you some numbers earlier, and I want to share this because somewhere in your mind, you're going to leave here and you're going to say, okay, well, that worked for him. And maybe it worked this year because he had 0 the year before. Maybe he just had a good year. Maybe he just hit and had a good year. Here's the deal, y'all. Right now, we have over $600,000 worth of contracts planned for next year of people who have said, yes, we're going to be working with you starting in January, that came off of podcasting. I have 2 more high value partnerships already planned that are going to generate cash next year. So no, it's not a one-hit wonder.
Love it. Well, where can people find more tips and possibly work with you? And get in your podcast. I don't think I've been on your podcast, Atiba.
Well, Mark, we got to fix that. Meetatiba.com will take you directly to my LinkedIn. If we're not connected already, please, let's talk. Let's have a good time together. I'm here to answer any of your questions. And if you want the SOPs, let me know. We'll send you the SOPs as well.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely share those with the community once we get them, the certified partner community. So I really appreciate the time, Atiba. We definitely need to talk more often. I think it's been too long, whether you or I remember or not. But definitely always good to connect with you. Excellent tips. And really appreciate your time. And I appreciate all of your time too. You guys have been showing up consistently, and I always enjoy these meetings on Fridays. It's a great way to end the week with a bunch of professionals who have the same values and goals in mind, which is help our clients get more money and have better businesses and better lives. So way to go, everybody. Go marketing. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye, y'all.